And you get some. There's consequences, obviously, if you're doing like what you did, dropping in on somebody who's obviously abusing of a certain power dynamic in the water, and the repercussion was another man trying to police you on behalf of his friend, or people saying, you know, you don't follow the rule, all of that. All the things that we hear every time we do something a bit subversive in the water.
By the way, the guy, his friend, sucked. He couldn't even surf. So
There you go.
I was
Then
like,
there's that.
really? You're talking to me? Okay.
Then there's that. Yeah. Again, a lot of gray area in the rules of etiquette and politics of surfing. Where was I going with that? So I love these Sunday morning blurry.
But you know
blurry
what?
things.
One area of clarification. You talk about like localism as a woman. So you're, because I wouldn't consider myself a local in
There
that
you go.
regard.
Okay.
So like how does that apply then?
Okay. So I'm borrowing this phrase, girl localism, from Krista Comer, who wrote a beautiful book, Surfer Girls in the New World Order. And
Great title.
Yeah,
It means
it's
so
wonderful.
much.
Yeah. So she really digs into a lot of these global dynamics that, as women surfers and as a surfing culture in general, we're starting to grapple with these situations and these dynamics of power. And from a gendered perspective, we can look at girl localism as sort of this thing that's everywhere but nowhere. It's sort of a placeless movement of people, of women surfers. We're very often in the minority at any given surf break on any given day, just given our numbers in surfing. I think we're less than 10% of the global surfing population is women. So we don't necessarily have that sort of place-based localism that we can exert as a gang,
Right.
as it's often done.
Right.
So girl localism can be used strategically and may or may not be done even consciously. It's just how we're existing and operating in the world in ways that are potentially challenging these dominant constructs, be they gender constructs, colonization constructs, right?
Okay, so I think I'm understanding, I don't know if I'm understanding this clearly. So the idea of localism is based on, it's not necessarily, you know, I've been here, it's about like, it's more relative to the lineup. I mean, not in terms of like that place, but the lineup, like you as a man, you know, you're exerting your entitlements and privileges without even thinking of it. And it's just to kind of like, I'm just creating the space for myself and, you know, seeing the landscape and trying to kind of like carve out my space. So it's the localism of trying to like allow space for you to exist.
Yeah, exactly. It can be thought of in terms of a sense of belonging. It can be thought of in terms of your place in a lineup, in a, you know, an ocean-based experience. So anytime we're in the ocean, there are politics of localism taking place. And again, we can think about girl localism and how women in the water, how we're negotiating those politics and those dynamics in many different subjective ways as we're going about our surfing experience.
So, I mean, that can exist in two ways. So it's relative to what's happening. So it's relative to what already exists, but it's also a way of like creating your own space. So it doesn't always have to be this negative thing where you're reacting to what's there, but it's just a sense of like, I belong in the water. We all belong in the water. And in order for me to be able to have that, do that, I have to kind of like, you know, the buck stops here.
Boundaries.
When it comes to you seeing the way the power dynamics exist on land, where those factors, you know, are exerted in the water.
Exactly. Completely. So kind of subverting that still very gentleman's only club sort of mentality that we see in the kind of whitewashed constructs of surfing culture, and then how that's playing out in the water. And how localism, in the ways that it's expressed in its different manifestations, how that's challenging and subverting some of those power constructs.
Wow, I mean, I so many things come to mind now, like so many different examples, like how these things would apply. It's just really fascinating that this kind of work is being done, and people are talking about this and thinking about it in terms of all these different intersections, whether they be gender or race or, you know, nationalism and capitalism and let's talk about that place that we where we met. And you know, it's interesting. I find that whenever you surf in a new place, it's immediately, you know, it's just like figuring out the temperature of the lineup and how it all, you know, and you have to kind of like prove yourself every time as a woman, especially. I think probably everyone, but especially as a woman, always have to kind of like prove that you deserve to be in the lineup, you know, because of the way people, what they do in the water, whether they drop in on you or, you know, paddle around you, whatever, or what they say to you, or, you know, like, share with me some of your experiences in this place. Because I have so many experiences from that one place alone.
in a week, right?
Amazing, and it's never with the locals from there. And it was all Americans who live there.
So, yes, that specific place is somewhere I've been going since I moved to Costa Rica. And it's always felt like this magical paradise, right? So I go there when it's like, I need a little break. I want to go be really close to nature. I want to just be in my happy place. And that said, even in doing something like that, I can still kind of be critiquing myself and interrogating how my privilege to just go and do something like that and the impact that I would have as a person doing that on a place, right? So, I'm my own biggest critic, right?
I think women tend to do that, right? Because we're constantly being critiqued for everything. And so we have to have that conversation in our head to be accountable also, but also to kind of defend ourselves like, wait a minute, no, I'm allowed to do this.
Exactly. That's an interesting point too. And given my line of work, it's critical studies. You're often critiquing yourself as a participant in the larger systems that you're critiquing as well. Which is often paralyzing, but can be liberating in some ways. Anyway, so in this place, there have been, I'll talk about two interesting experiences that really have fueled a lot of this work that I'm doing now and has led me to interview a lot of people down there and just to talk about these relationships of localism. Because it's an interesting place. You have a settler community of people mostly from California who are the original non-Costa Rican settlers of that area. So that meant that they bought land in kind of a strange scenario where someone from California needed to kind of move money quick, right? And I won't get into all the details just because
I know what you're talking about.
It's hearsay, right? If you're involved in some shady dealings and you need to just kind of recuperate some money pretty quickly. He was buying some land and then reselling it for inexpensive rates according to California oceanfront standards in a place that's known for having quality waves. So an influx of Californian surfers came down in the 90s. And so that's when that area started getting developed by foreigners. And before then, there were probably a handful of Costa Rican surfers who would make the trek, because back then it was a trek, right? Back then there weren't really accessible roads with vehicles. You'd be like maybe on a motorbike, maybe hiking in literally hours to go and bring your tent or your hammock, set up shop, bring all your food because there's no one cooking, make your fire on the beach, and that was it, right? Every surfer's kind of feral surfing dream, I guess.
Until you think about the mosquitoes.
Then there's that.
No running water, you get a cut, whatever.
But at that point there weren't any there wasn't like a local surfing Costa Rican community in that area. So at that point it was a bit of free reign. You're living the California dream in this beautiful place in Costa Rica, uncrowded. It's that kind of endless summer thing that you're living out for yourself and your buddies. So that's kind of where that began. And then the word started getting out slowly about this place and more visiting, mostly foreign surfers started coming, setting up their tents. So the settler community of Californians kind of got a name for themselves for harassing visitors because they didn't want them there, right? They wanted to keep surfing. So
this is a thing. This is really a historic thing. Interesting.
So in the 90s,
I stepped right into it.
Yeah, you did, exactly. In the 90s, this California surf gang living in this spot in Costa Rica got a name for themselves for kind of slitting people's tents. They weren't like being super violent, but they were making it a little bit tricky for people to want to surf there and want to stay there and want to camp there.
God, that's so obnoxious. That's so obnoxious.
Right.
I mean, also given how, relatively speaking, there's still not that many people there. So,
exactly.
You know, you can imagine how few there were then, and the fact that there are these kind of acts of aggression.
Yeah, totally.
You know, like you can't share a freaking wave.
Totally. And I mean, maybe it was with the intention of we don't want this place to turn into the next whatever.
Right.
But still, yeah, it's foreigners exerting its sort of localism in a place that isn't their home as a settler community.
I love the use of this word, settler. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's important. And Dina Giulio Whitaker, she does a lot of work around settler colonialism in surfing and surfing tourism.
Wow.
Her work's amazing. She's based out of California, too. All right, so that's in the 90s. Flash forward to today. Now there's a lot of Costa Rican surfers.
Amazing surfers.
Yeah, in like their 20s and 30s,
Yeah.
right? And some of them are sons and daughters of Costa Ricans who have gone there to live because of the presence of foreigners and the expansion of some kind of tourism amenities in the area. There's now homes there, a couple of hotels, a restaurant bar.
Right.
So there's kind of a culture of caretaker where when the foreign settler isn't there in his home, there's a Costa Rican who's taking care of the place.
Right.
And moving in with their families. So some of the sons and daughters of those people who have moved there are now local surfers.
Right.
And people from the neighboring town that has more of a population, a good 40-minute drive away, they're coming down when they can as well. So again, now you have this kind of aging crew of California surf settlers who own property and consider themselves very entitled to the waves. And then you have the Costa Rican local surfers who are younger, the kind of the next generation, who might have even learned to surf from some of these guys, right? So that's interesting.
Most likely, yeah.
Yeah. And then an experience that I had that kind of brings this all together is there was one of these kind of mid-generation, I'd say, California surfers who was kind of bragging to me about an experience he had in the water.
In an effort to pick you up.
Yeah, I felt a little like that, like kind of like, look at me kind of deal. Or at least wanting me to know that he's like the big man, right?
Oh my God.
Kind of funny.
Hilarious. I know exactly the moment and like I could just see it.
You've been there.
Yeah.
So he's bragging to me about this experience where he is surfing at the spot that he's been surfing for 20 years, right? And then who would have thought that one of these local Costa Rican surfers would have been exerting some localism against him, paddling around him back to the point, dropping in on every wave.
His words or his sentiments.
His sentiments, exactly. And so he had the audacity to kind of speak to the guy and say, hey, like, what are you doing? Don't drop it on me. Stop that. And the local kid turned to him and said, hey, this is my country. These are my waves.
Right.
And then he returned that by saying, well, this is my sport. Right. So claiming ownership of the sport of surfing.
He's Californian.
He's Californian and maybe fourth generation Californian, right? So he's claiming ownership of surfing.
So he doesn't have a drop of Hawaiian, anything, or Polynesian, nothing.
No, he's out of the Beach Boy video, right?
Wow.
It's his sport, according to him. And therefore, he then has even a greater sense of entitlement and ownership over the waves.
But this is what I mean, like the changing of the goalpost, right? Like it's constantly like my rules, like whatever is convenient to me to constantly enforce this power dynamic that I always have the upper hand.
Exactly.
And that I should, I'm entitled to the privilege of everything.
Yeah.
That is so wild.
Yeah, so that kind of blew my mind.
Of history.
Yeah, completely appropriating history, which is what modern surf culture has done anyway, right? By claiming this sort of California dream as one of the origin stories of surfing. Wow. So that was one, and then there have been many, right? But another one that's kind of an interesting experience of how different localisms are playing out. There was another guy at another spot.
Is this my favorite person?
In there. This is your favorite person because you had an instance with him. Yeah.
Every single day. Yeah. Did I tell you he stole my plates of my rental car? I'm pretty sure he did.
What?
Yeah, when I returned my rental car, the front plate was missing. And this is after he'd written stuff in the dust on my, windows and stuff. Yeah. It's fine. It was fine, but
I
I was